Hi, I'm Gary Payrow. Thank you for joining me and listening to this prophetic message for the church in America. I pray often for our nation. I have heroes like Dutch Sheets, John and Jolene Hamill, and I admire them greatly. Recently, I was talking to the Lord about the problems that we have regarding elections and how we're so divided about whether or not we can trust them. I mused that it resembled other issues where things just seemed blocked by a demonic presence that was holding people's minds captive. And then I kind of had an aha moment of course, that's what it is. Sometimes you just know and you know, or a prophetic knowing. And then I remembered a video I had seen recently about the travesty of justice in Guatemala, where we not only rigged elections, but even engaged in genocide just to establish our financial interests in that country. So I started thinking about it and doing some research, and I was amazed at how deep our involvement goes in corrupting elections in foreign countries. And so that is the genesis of this prophetic message. And you can download this. I'll put the links to it below this video. But it's called Standing Against Lawlessness. And our elections are in crisis. Regardless of your opinion of the 2020 election integrity, it's clear that we are having a crisis of confidence in our electoral process. A 2020 poll released by ABC News showed that only 20% of the population has confidence in the country's elections. And in spite of this, no major actions have been taken to restore our trust in this sacred and essential institution. In contrast, you'll remember the massive Mueller investigation that was launched looking for potential Trump collusion with Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Yet to date, we have not seen any investigation that might answer the concerns troubling millions of Americans. I believe that there is a demonic stronghold involved in hiding the evidence and blinding people's eyes to the truth. Our own national sins have opened the door to this demonic intrusion. The roots of this spiritual iniquity run deep in our nation's history, starting over 100 years ago. In 1893, when the US led the overthrow of the sovereign nation of Hawaii. That was followed by a string of interventions, coups, and compromised elections. Now, looking at our shameful history, American missionaries first came to Hawaii in 1820. Now, a lot of them were well-intentioned, and interestingly, the effort to establish a mission in the islands was initiated by a native full-blooded Hawaiian man named Henry Opukahaya. Having converted to Christianity, he traveled to the United States to become a minister and was passionate about bringing the salvation message to the Hawaiian people, whom he saw as heathens who were practicing idol worship. While many locals were saved by the gospel, numbers of these new immigrants were much more motivated by economic concerns rather than evangelistic fervor. And by the 1890s, the financial interests of the American sugar and pineapple growers came to dominate the attitudes of our transplants there. Now, they were being threatened by a sovereignty move by the rightful monarch, Queen Liliuokalani. And they convinced President Grover Cleveland to look the other way as US Marines helped overthrow her government. This was the first time US troops were used in the coup of a foreign government, but it would not be the last. It also began an era of meddling in foreign elections that has persisted into the modern day. Now, many of these early interventions, especially in the Americas, were coups intended to topple legitimate governments. The ousting of President Zelaya of Nicaragua in 1910 was the first actual coup run directly by our government. But direct military interventions like those in Cuba and the Philippines began to get costly, both from a financial standpoint and a political one. In the latter 20th century, manipulating elections became the favored approach across Europe, Latin America, and the Middle East. In his excellent book, Meddling in the Ballot Box, Dr. Dov H. Levin discloses that the US has meddled in over 80 elections in the 20th century following World War II. The Soviet Union came in a distant second with about half the number. So that makes us the unquestioned global leader in election interference. With all this meddling, often just to satisfy the financial desires of government cronies, it's obvious that the US has stepped outside any bounds of legitimacy. While we love to think of our nation as the global protector of democracy, this is belied by our sordid history as an imperialist power dominating and often intimidating weaker nations. In Latin America, where we instituted repressive regimes came to be known as banana republics, we have wreaked havoc in countries like Nicaragua, Guatemala, and even Mexico. The social and economic toll has been tragic. 100 years later, our government acknowledged the national crime against Hawaii, our 50th state at the time, when Congress under President Clinton offered an apology to Native Hawaiians. But to many other nations, the damage has been largely ignored completely. This has delighted the powers of hell to have such a grand partner as the United States to participate in their brutal, repressive agenda. But what happens when a nation partners with such evil spirits? We can see many examples from the Old Testament. When the Israelites turned to worship gods and then were afflicted by these same demons. In our own recent history, we can see the unprecedented rise in violence like school shootings since the passage of Roe versus Wade and the concurrent rise in abortions. We partnered with the spirit of death, and we have suffered at its hand. This illustrates well the truth of Galatians 6:7, which reads, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap." In partnering with spirits of lawlessness and hegemony to overturn elections in other countries, we have allowed those same spirits to have access to our nation and to corrupt our elections. But we are the answer. The good news is that the Church of Jesus Christ is uniquely positioned to bring lasting change. In Matthew 16:18, where Christ declares that we, the church, would prevail against the gates of hell, he used a term, the Greek term, ekklesia, which was translated church. This was a governmental term. It applied to groups of citizens that were called out to mediate important decisions of the day. It indicates that the church is to be involved in important governmental issues of our day. We are Christ's primary instrument, in fact, in bringing his kingdom to earth. As we see from the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, where we always pray, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." We also see this high calling established in the Great Commission, listed in Matthew 28 and in Mark 16. Now, kingdom, the term kingdom is not expressly mentioned here, but of course, it's clear when the commands were given to drive out demons, to make disciples of all nations, to obey everything that Jesus commanded, that we are to be establishing his kingdom. And from Second Chronicles 7:14, we know that his focus is on the church. He doesn't say, "Hey, everybody in the world." He says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways. Then I will forgive their sins, hear them from heaven, forgive their sins, and heal their land. So, how should we respond to such a great responsibility? Well, we have three great examples from the Old Testament: Daniel, Nehemiah, and Esther. In Daniel 9, 4 through 19, the faithful prophet of God confesses the sins of the Jews. Now, the Bible lists him as one of the most blameless men who ever lived. Yet he identifies personally with the sin of the people. This powerful act resulted in a great move of God where he disclosed the vision of 70 weeks of prophecy for Israel's whole history, which is still unfolding. Nehemiah similarly declares, "We have sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned." Now, Nehemiah was a great preacher of righteousness, and yet he identified with the sins of the people. And his prayer of identification led to the rebuilding of a wall in only 52 days. And some Bible scholars say it had been 70 years in trying to get it built. And yet they did it after Nehemiah made that pledge. They did it in only 52 days. And Esther went into the king at the risk of her own life. She pleaded for the safety of her people, the Jews, who were threatened with extermination by the evil Haman. Now, we may not be facing annihilation in this country, but our democratic republic cannot survive without fair elections. And the world needs America to stay free. If we want free and fair elections in this country, we need to be delivered from the demonic influence of lawlessness and hegemony. As the ecclesia in America, we need to confess our national sins of greed, election meddling, and control in order to be free. We cannot expect people to recognize election malfeasance when we have covenanted with evil spirits that have darkened their minds. We are God's called out ones, commissioned to disciple America in righteousness and justice, the foundations of God's throne. He has given us wisdom and compassion from on high, and we are uniquely positioned to confess the sins of our nation. Repentance will break our covenant with the demonic spirits ruling over our elections and restore to us the authority to depose them. The time is urgent, but the Lord is swift to answer. We are the faithful remnant, called for such a time as this. We must spread this message to all believers and restore free and fair elections to the land. Please pray into this vision and share it with your friends, pastors, and prayer groups. Please let me know if I can help you spread this message by coming to speak to your church groups, political groups, or any media outlet where you may have influence. I am excited and confident that we can have an impact this November and for the rest of our nation's history. With that, I thank you for listening. Please reach out to me at the link below. You can send me emails, and I am happy to travel or to get on any kind of Zoom mediated session in order to share this message and to encourage the ecclesia in staying in the fight. So thank you very much. God bless you all, and let's have a fair and safe election in November 2024.